This is a tutorial to show you how to access the databases from the York College Library website. So after you have successfully logged on using the virtual private network, you should go to the York College Library page and you should click on what we have right here, the Articles and More tab. Um, from that screen, you will come to this page, which is an alphabetical listing of all of the databases that York College subscribes to. And there are quite a few of them. Um, they Some of them are very general databases that cover a lot of different kinds of topics, like Academic Search Complete. That's a great database to start your search in. Um, there are other ones that are much more specific. For example, CINAHL is a database that you might use if you are doing research in the field of nursing. There are databases specific to the fields of psychology, business, etc., etc. So make sure you check out the handout that is included in this week's list of assignments, because there are some databases that may be more or less helpful to you depending on what topic you have chosen for your paper. Um, Once you select a database, and for this particular tutorial, I'm going to be taking you to Academic Search Complete. You just log on by clicking, assuming you've gone in through a VPN access, you should click on this yellow box here. If you don't have VPN access and you're logging on from home, then you do click on the little green house, and when you do that, you're going to be prompted to enter your barcode, and you'll have to re-enter your barcode every time you move to a different database. If you log on through VPN access, then it will be as though you are sitting right on campus as far as the computer is concerned, albeit just a little bit slower. So you'll be able to move from one database to the other if you're not finding what you want. One other thing I want to say about this before I go ahead and go into the database: some of the databases are full text databases, and some of them are databases that only include abstracts, or that might include a mixture of abstracts and full text. And what I mean by full text is many of the databases have links to the articles in their entirety. So if you perform a search and you find an article title that seems promising and you click on it, it will take you to a place where you can access either a PDF of the article, or sometimes just a text file that has the content of the article in it. You want to make sure that you try to access full text sources in your database searching, just because of the nature of this course. If you had a whole semester, or if you weren't sort of dealing with a set of library holdings that's all over the place, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But if you find something in the database and it's not a full text source, you're going to have to try to track down a college that has a physical copy of the journal on site, and that's getting increasingly difficult to do. York's physical holdings have continued to get smaller and smaller every year because, of course, these databases are very popular and they are quite expensive. So most of the money that York Library now has to spend on providing resources to its students, it directs towards these databases. The other option would be, rather than locating the source physically, would be to order it through interlibrary loan. And interlibrary loan can be a great service if you're doing a whole semester long project that you start at the very, very, very beginning of the semester. Or if you are, say, doing a longer project that will span across semesters. But for something that's taking kind of just about half a semester, I think what you'll run into is if you go to order something through interlibrary loan, it's not going to come in fast enough for you to be able to incorporate it into this project. So my recommendation is to not rely on interlibrary loan. Try to find sources that you can either physically locate, or even more preferably, try to find full text sources through the database, and we'll talk about how to look for those a little bit later. Okay, so once you click on the database you wish to go into, in this case we are going into this one, Academic Search Complete, you'll come to the search page. And there are a few things that I want to point out about the search page. I'm going to start here just in the basic search field, and that's where I will be entering my search terms. If you've watched, and hopefully you have watched, the short video about Boolean logic, you'll know that this particular database, like many others, can organize its searching using Boolean terms. And so you want to follow Boolean logic as you're formulating your search words. You also can see down here that there are some ways that you can limit your results. So the first one that you're going to want to check is this full text. That will make sure that you're not just getting every source that's out there, but only the sources for which you have access to the text itself. That will save you time. It will save you the frustration of thinking to yourself, oh, this would be so good if I could have it in my paper, but oh wait, I can't. It doesn't, there's no way I can actually locate the resource. This is also something that you may want to check as well. This is a way to filter so that you only get scholarly or peer-reviewed journals, meaning only articles from those journals that go through the rigorous process known as peer review. Now, depending on the kind of topic rather that you are trying to develop your paper about, that may not be what you ultimately want to do. If you're dealing with something that intersects more closely with popular culture and you are hoping to find some kinds of resources through, say, newspaper articles or magazine articles, those can be very reliable sources, but they won't have gone through the process that we describe as scholarly or peer review. So you just want to kind of be aware of what your purposes are as a researcher and what kinds of sources you're going to want to locate. So, how might searching look? Well, the first thing I want to show you is my search string using the keywords that we generated in the tutorial on generating search terms from your thesis question. And we decided that we would have these three search terms: best practices, and sex education, and autism. And in this case, I'm using and between all of these terms because I want this database to find articles in which all three of these terms appear. As you can see right here, of course, what happened was that we didn't get an exact result, so the program turned on what's called smart text searching to find results that they feel like will serve us well given the keywords that we entered. But of course, if you look at the very first one, you're going to see that their idea of keywords maybe wasn't our idea of keywords, because we're getting best education practices for students with autism, and that's not what we're really interested in. We're really interested in the best practices for sex education. So this, when we reach this point, when you enter search terms and you don't get what you want or what you think you want, there are a few different things you can do. The first thing that, it probably sounds silly, but the first thing is if you type in your search terms and nothing comes back, make sure your search terms are spelled correctly. This particular database, and many of the databases are not like Google. They do not have spelling suggestions. They don't correct your spelling errors for you. So you want to make sure your search terms are spelled correctly. That often creates a problem if they're not. In this case, they were, and we still didn't get what we wanted. Well, why not? Well, because we didn't find any sources that included the phrases best practices and sex education and autism in their search fields. So we have to think about maybe retooling our search terms. And it seems to me that the most obvious one that we can take out is best practices, because that's more than a evaluative term. And we could find articles about sex education and autism, and then based on our reading, make our own determinations about sex practices. So I think that that's what we will do. So we'll head toward the next slide. And when we entered sex education and autism, this was a really great, kind of a really great combination because we got 18 results. And 18 results is a very nice number. It's a very manageable number. It's not too many, not too few. If you do a search and you come back with 18 results, or even if you really come back with, say, 30 results or 40 results, that's a really good kind of number to end up with because that's a manageable number of sources to go through. Not necessarily read the whole source, although you might actually with 18, you probably could. But you would be able to at least read the abstracts and get some sense of whether or not you really have gotten a good set of information, what's out there, and what else you might need to look for. Now, let's look at an example of a broader search, and let's talk about the different possibilities. So let's say I decide that I'm going to search for sexuality and disability. Maybe I feel like I needed to get a little bit more broad because maybe I didn't find what I wanted with sex education and autism. You see that when we type in the words sexuality and disability, we actually get a really large number. We get 1,299 results, and that's a lot of results. It's really too many results. So the first thing that I want to point you to is ways that we can refine our search. And here we have a few possibilities. We have checking for full text. We have checking for scholarly and peer-reviewed articles. If we check those, we can limit the number of publications that we get. We can also look at the publication dates, and this might be something you want to limit anyway. You can see that this has publications from 1935 to 2013, and probably you're not going to want sources from 1935. Of course, if you're looking at the evolution of our understanding of sexuality in people with disabilities or people with autism more specifically, and how that's changed over time, well then yes, maybe you want to go back to 1935. But if you are looking at this from a contemporary perspective, or actually many topics, what you're going to want to do is find the most current research because the fields change. Then you can really change this range of publication dates. And when you do that, it's going to change the number of sources you get because it's going to weed out everything that came out before the beginning of the time limitation you put on it. So that's one way that you can proceed to limitations. There are also ways, if you continue down this bar, I apologize that it can't be live, but the York College website just wasn't cooperating today. But if you continue down this bar, you'll find that there are ways to limit the search by geographical location. You can find only articles, say, that focus on the United States, or only articles that focus on Poland, as well as there are a couple of other different types of limitations. So if you end up with a lot of results, use the features on this bar in order to limit the parameters of your search so you can have a more manageable number. Now, let's just kind of pretend that for some bizarre reason, my search had returned too few results. You can also do what's called truncating, and here is an example of truncating. A word like sex, as well as a word like disability, has lots of different forms, right? There's sex, there's sexual, there's sexuality, there's sex education, and disability also has many different forms. There's disabled, disabling, disability, disabilities. So what you can do is what's called truncating. And you take the stem of the word, in this case it's sex and disab, and at the end of the word stem you type an asterisk. So what this will tell the database to do is to search for all of the possible word forms of this stem, plus all of the possible word forms of this stem, and you obviously don't have to truncate all of your terms. But you can see what a dramatic effect it had on the number of results we got. I mean, we went from basically 1,300 results to 7,235 results just by truncating our search terms. So that can be a way of opening up your search if you find that you need to do so. The next thing that I want to show you that you can do with Boolean logic is to search for an either or term, right? Let's say that I'm interested in sexuality and disability, but I don't really know what I want to focus on yet. Maybe I want to focus on autism, maybe I want to focus on paralysis, and I just kind of want to see what's out there. So what you can do is you can say, use the first part of your term, sexuality, and then you can use parentheses to tell the database to search for either disability and autism or disability and paralysis. And Boolean logic works just the same way that math does. When I was in 7th grade, my math teacher taught me PEMDAS, right? Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, etc., etc. Well, this is working the same way. The first thing that it's going to search for is what's in the parentheses. It reads this first. So it will read either autism and disability, or paralysis, I'm sorry, autism and sexuality, or paralysis and sexuality. And if you scroll through the results, you see that in fact that there's both. The first one is this first source here is sexuality in people with paralysis from Parkinson's disease, and then this next one you can see is sort of partially sexual orientation in the auditory system. That's sexuality in somebody with autism. So both of them are accounted for in this particular search. The last thing that I want to show you is the use of not. And the last one we kind of opened up the search by searching for the combination of sexuality plus sexuality plus autism, or sexuality plus paralysis. In this case, if I want to look at sexuality and autism, but I want to make sure I don't get any I don't get any sources that talk about Asperger's syndrome, what I can do is search for sexuality and then in parentheses autism, not Asperger. So what will happen is the database will read this, and it will only find articles that include the word autism but do not talk about Asperger's syndrome. And then it will look for those articles that talk about autism but not Asperger's syndrome in relation to sexuality. So that is an additional way that you can use Boolean logic to limit your search terms. My best advice to you is to just kind of play around with this. You're going to have to see which search terms work for you. You're going to have to see which combination of search terms work for you. One other thing that we should talk about here is that you might go to use a search term and you don't get anything, and you're going to have to think about yourself if there are synonyms or other things that other ways of referring to this concept that might be in use by the database. For instance, we are doing a lot of research about disability, but maybe you want to look at other words for disability like handicap. When you're talking about autism, you might want to look at words like developmental disorder. So if you're looking at teenagers, you might want to look at adolescents. So think about other things or other ways of labeling your search terms. And if you're not finding much, consider trying those terms instead.